Yes, Criterion. I believe your next release should be The Giant Claw. It's a beautiful, much misunderstood film. I think it's worthy of a release. Hello? I guess they don't agree with me. Every November, Barnes & Noble has a 50% off Criterion Collection sale. The perfect time of year to go in and purchase some new Blu-rays or DVDs for your personal Criterion collection. So I thought, as kind of a little precursor to that, and also for the end of our Betamax Blocker Halloween festivities, I would go through and review 10 different Criterion horror or sci-fi titles. Now there are many, many of these titles in the Criterion collection. I don't have them all, I'll be the first to admit it, but I looked through my stuff and I picked out 10 that I'd like to talk about today. Please comment some of your favorites, Criterion or not, in the comments below. Since this has been Hitchcock month in many ways, here's Criterion's release of one of his earliest films, 1927's The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog. This was really Hitchcock's first horror, or at least horror-ish kind of movie. It's never been a favorite of mine because while his direction is quite good, and there are some very famous sequences in this, notably where he's shooting the floor of a room above and we see the lodger, the mysterious man who's rented a room, pacing back and forth above him through the floor. It's a really cool shot and it's aged really well. But despite that, the acting has never been quite good and the story's pretty loose. Ivor Novello, who plays the lodger, actually had quite a bit of say in how things went, and I'm sure clashed with Hitchcock in a lot of ways. So it's not one of Hitchcock's best in my view. I know some people really enjoy it. It's not even my favorite Hitchcock silent. But I didn't get a chance to talk much about his silent films. I want it to kick off today's video. This is a beautiful print of the film, much restored from the pseudo-public domain copies. If you've watched my Hitchcock videos, you definitely recognize this cheapo pack that for many years was the best way American fans could watch Hitchcock films, or early Hitchcock films I should say. But it's nice that it has a proper Criterion release. And a bonus feature is Hitchcock's movie Downhill, also starring Novello, which is not a horror or suspense or anything like that. It's a much more conventional drama. But The Lodger, seminal early work from Hitchcock, not a personal favorite of mine, but if you're a fan of the guy, you gotta check it out and see. Got some really interesting parts. We talked about the Laird Krieger remake from the 40s in one of last year's Halloween videos. Please check that out if you haven't already. Speaking of the silent era, from 1922, here's Hexon, Witchcraft Throughout the Ages. Hexon is a very strange film. It's kind of presented as a pseudo-documentary, but it's very heavily fictionalized in some scenes and given more of a narrative, but then other scenes are more documentary in style. It's very odd. It feels almost like several films that were kind of mashed together into one, I think, is maybe the best way to assess it. But the makeup and some of the more practical effects, as you see one of the demons on the front cover there, is fantastic. If you look up the trailer, the Satan character is featured very prominently, and you won't forget that makeup anytime soon. It also has some then modern day scenes, now over 100 years old, of torture instruments being used on contemporary people, you know, putting little thumb screws and things on these young women who volunteered to have it done, apparently. Very strange. Hexon, of course, or Hexon, is maybe most famous for being reissued with William S. Burroughs narrating. I never watched that version. I prefer the original, you know, technically silent version. Some very interesting visuals despite a loose story, and one that I think it's worth checking out. We got some really neat imagery, and you can kind of see the earliest murmurings of something like the Blair Witch Project here. You know, very similar in tone, I would say. It's kind of like an anthology in some ways because it's such a loose story. Now, if you're like me, you'll love a good horror anthology. Of course, my favorite and one of the most famous, the seminal 1945's Dead of Night. You know, several smaller horror stories tied together into one film and one kind of overarching narrative. Dead of Night was way ahead of its time, and I can't recommend it enough. I'm kind of surprised that Criterion never actually released it. Now, there are lots of other horror anthologies, of course. You know, the Creepshow films and Trilogy of Terror films. Here's from the 60s, Tales of Terror, an Edgar Allan Poe one for you. Very good watch. But I want to talk about the Criterion one. Here is from 1965, Quon. So this is a horror anthology from Japan with four very Japanese flavored horror stories. The Lady in the Snow is the absolute highlight of the film. It's very well done. Quon isn't for everyone. It's over 3 hours long, and the pacing is very slow by design, but it is a beautiful film, photographed so wonderfully. And there are scenes that are designed to look like the ancient Japanese artwork you might see from several hundred years ago. Some very interesting stuff. That being said, of course, it's not for everyone. The slow pace, and also the stories are not intertwined in any way. There's no overarching narrative, really. And the last one has a lame cop-out ending. I actually there was a review that said it's a lame cop-out ending twice over, which is also true. And if you don't like biwa music and the chanting that goes with it, you'll probably find one of the stories in here very tedious. But I was fascinated by Quon, and I'm quite glad I saw it. Something different there. It's very visually striking. And not pulpy as we might think of when we think of horror anthologies. You kind of think of, maybe sillier stories or less important stories. But not in this case. This was definitely a labor of love for everyone involved. And it shows. Beautifully made film. Going to something a little more conventional. One of my favorites of the 1930s. Island of Lost Souls. Featuring the man himself, Sir Charles Laughton, as Dr. Moreau. And Richard Arlen might just be the fellow who has to mate with the half-woman, half-panther creature. So Island of Lost Souls had a VHS release, but then for many years was not issued to DVD. Criterion was actually the first time it went beyond VHS. Here's the weird press-to-open VHS rental case that I have. If you watched some of my videos last Halloween and my 1-year anniversary video, we talk more about this because it's pretty bizarre. But it's so nice that it finally got a Blu-ray/DVD release. Island of Lost Souls, very influential on Devo. Indeed, one of the bonus features on here are the members of Devo talking about it. But a film that was way ahead of its time. Some striking makeup effects, and yeah, it does have some over-the-top early 30s acting. But Charles Laughton steals the show, and the beast creature makeup, including Bela Lugosi as the Sayer of the Law, definitely make it worth watching. I think one reason why it kind of drifted, off the radar for a while was, of course, the Dr. Moreau story has been done many times over since. Here's the one with Marlon Brando that the making of is perhaps more fascinating than the movie itself. But definitely recommend Island of Lost Souls. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out. I think you'll like it. Sticking with some of the classics from 1944, The Uninvited. The Uninvited was kind of one of those films that pushed a little more towards psychological horror. In the early 40s, we saw things like Cat People, which does have a Criterion release. I actually don't have that one. But it was so important that they, I guess, felt they should release it, quite rightfully so. The Uninvited, though, deals with ghost characters, but they turn out to be real ghosts, not Nazi saboteurs in disguise, as we'd see in so many 1940s films. And Ray Milland is quite good in the lead, this haunted house with not one, but two spirits. One evil and one good, and figuring out how this young girl, played by Gail Russell, figures into all this. I actually saw this on stage, too. Interestingly enough, there's a stage adaptation, which tonally is a lot different than the film, but does manage to capture some of its scarier moments and its more effective moments. And I must say, all told, The Uninvited, if you're a fan of ghost stories, is a must-see. This was another one that was only available on VHS for a very long time, and Criterion helped to kind of bring it back into the light, and I appreciate that, too. And the jazz standard, Stella by Starlight, originated for this film. Pretty cool. One more from the 40s for you. One I know I've talked about here before. The Devil and Daniel Webster, the film that kind of popularized the Jury of the Damned concept there. A young farmer offers to sell his soul in exchange for great wealth, so he doesn't have to struggle his whole life, not fully realizing the terms of the contract, and then Daniel Webster acts as his counsel in a celestial court. Now, some people don't like The Devil and Daniel Webster because it is full of kind of hokey, folksy American, humor and American know-how and whatnot. And some people think that kind of clashes with the sort of bargain with the devil idea. And I mean, it does, the devil will steal a pie from your windowsill and eat it, that kind of thing. It maybe doesn't tonally fit with, hey, your soul's eternally damned. But I think it works quite well. And Walter Houston, seen there as Satan, is definitely the highlight of the film, steals every scene he's in. Really good stuff there. And the Jury of the Damned scenes are done quite well with kind of these ghostly figures of Benedict Arnold and the Hart brothers and whatnot. Really stand out. Though they did make up some of the characters on the Jury of the Damned, just for the record. But a pretty interesting film, all told. I liked it quite a bit. And if you can look past maybe some of the silliness and some of the lighter stuff, it has a good message to it. The next one of my all-time favorites, Arsenic and Old Lace. Insanity runs in my family, it practically gallops. Arsenic and Old Lace is another one of those movies that was way ahead of its time, you know, for coming out during World War II. A dark comedy about your, you know, old maid aunts who kill and bury in the transients in the basement is maybe a little unexpected. Here's actually the colorized VHS tape. I love Arsenic and Old Lace. I had to have this as soon as I saw it. But it's such a great film. Cary Grant is out of control. It's probably his wackiest movie role. And to think of all the romantic comedies the guy did, you know, bringing up Baby and whatnot, that to say that is something. But, I mean, he is hilarious in this. John Alexander at the top steals the show, too, as Teddy Roosevelt. After you watch this, it's going to be very difficult to not walk up to a flight of stairs, yell charge, and run up them. It's a movie that's very unique. And we even have Raymond Massey and Peter Lorre for good measure. A lot of fun there. One that kind of does a good job of combining the scares of Halloween with wild comedy. Another big favorite of mine, Rosemary's Baby. Your creepy elderly neighbors might be up to something malicious. Maybe even a pact with Satan, who knows. So I watched Rosemary's Baby on VHS for years. This is the tape I had as a teenager, actually. I like that they kept the cover art there, which I believe is based on the original poster for the Criterion release. But it was so nice to go from this crappy old tape to this nice restored release there. Of course, based on the book by Ira Levin, which I highly recommend. The movie follows the book very closely. And indeed, you can see on the back of my copy of the book an ad for the film. Mia Farrow there. She's very good in it and trying to protect her unborn child from whatever these wicked neighbors have in mind. And you can see an influence from earlier films like The Black Cat and The Seventh Victim, but it also kind of does its own thing. And the direction by Roman Polanski, very kind of gentle and not, you know, too showy. And I think that helps create kind of this eerie atmosphere. But such a good movie, and very quotable too. Another one from the 60s, also about children, but in kind of a different way. Deborah Kerr in The Innocence. I wanted to show you the kind of melodramatic VHS art versus the very more, I guess, ethereal Criterion art there. I love The Innocence too. Deborah Kerr, appointed as the governess for two very unusual children, and trying to figure out how people who have since deceased may have some impact on them. You know, it's a movie that is kind of dreamlike, and I really appreciate that. Again, kind of ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Shot in very moody, beautiful black and white, and Deborah Kerr carries the show. She is quite good in it. Can't recommend it enough. This is when I should have watched this Halloween, come to think of it. And lastly, what should be our 10th one, Hey, Don't Look Now, from 1973, with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. So when vacationing in Italy to kind of help get over the death of their young daughter, why does this young couple keep seeing weird visions that look like her and so on, and keep experiencing all these sort of otherworldly things? Daphne du Maurier wrote the book. Mine does not have a dust jacket, so we'll have to look at the spine. Don't Look Now. It's actually like a novella. There are other stories in here. But it's a very interesting film and a very unique premise, kind of going from more like an occult kind of thing, you know, they meet these old women who claim to be psychic and so on. Something kind of different. Daphne du Maurier, we probably remember best today for her film contributions anyway, for writing the book that Hitchcock's Rebecca is based on. And Rebecca does have a Criterion release. I don't have that one, but it does indeed have one. And I love Rebecca, so I knew I was going to like Don't Look Now, and indeed I did. A very effective final shot too, some beautiful color cinematography. And there's a little bit of very graphic sex in there too, so maybe not for everybody, but I was very impressed with the horror elements, and I found it to be a very enjoyable film. Now, there are lots of other titles, horror and science fiction titles from Criterion, so I figure maybe next Halloween we'll take a look at a few different ones. In the meantime, please comment some of your favorites below. I hope to be back soon, both with a Beach Boys Sounds of Summer video and also with my November Criterion haul. In the meantime, go out there and enjoy the last few days of Halloween. I wore my Count Dracula shirt today. Hope you find something to do full of spooks and surprises. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.